in the heart of Los Angeles in 1947, against the backdrop of post-World War II America, a mystery emerged that would come to be known as the Black Dahlia case. Elizabeth Short, a young woman with dreams of Hollywood stardom, found herself at the center of something terrifying. In late 1946, Elizabeth made her way to California, chasing her dreams in the City of Angels. In January 1947, her lifeless and severely mutilated body was discovered in a vacant lot in Los Angeles' Leimert Park neighborhood. The nature of her murder, as well as the circumstances surrounding her death, makes the Black Dahlia one of the biggest unsolved cases in the history of the United States. Welcome back to the chilling realm of True Crime Expresso, where we travel deep into the abyss of solved and unsolved crimes and cryptic mysteries from all corners of the planet. In today's video, we will cover the 77-year-old cold case of Elizabeth Short. Join us as we delve into the investigation, theories, and mystery of the Black Dahlia, a true case that has been lost in time. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in the Hyde Park section of Boston, Massachusetts, as the third of 5 daughters of Cleo Alvin Short Jr. and Phoebe May Sawyer. Her sisters were Virginia May West, Dorothea Schlosser, Elnora Chalmers, and Cleo Alvin Short Jr. Her father was a United States Navy sailor born in 1885 in Gloucester, to Cleo Alvin Short Sr. and Alice Ada Billups. Phoebe May Sawyer, her mother, was a housewife born in 1897 in Millbridge, Maine, to Charles Turner Sawyer and Ella Nora Brown. They got married in Portland, Cumberland in 1918. The Short family briefly moved to Portland, Maine in 1927, before settling in Medford, Massachusetts later that year. Unfortunately, Cleo Alvin Short Jr. faced financial difficulties due to the 1929 stock market crash, and in 1930, his car was found abandoned on the Charlestown Bridge, which led to the assumption that he had jumped into the Charles River. Believing her husband was dead, Short's mother took a bookkeeper job to support the family. Elizabeth Short, troubled by bronchitis and severe asthma attacks, had lung surgery at the age of 15. Following the surgery, doctors recommended that she spend time in a milder climate to avoid further respiratory problems. So, her mother sent her to Miami, Florida, to stay with family friends during the winters for the next 3 years. Elizabeth dropped out of Medford High School during her sophomore year. In late 1942, Elizabeth's mother received a letter of apology from her presumed dead husband, revealing that he was, in fact, alive, and had started a new life in California. At the age of 18 in December, Elizabeth decided to relocate to Vallejo, California, to reunite with her father, whom she hadn't seen since she was 6 years old. Her father was employed at the nearby Mare Island Naval Shipyard in San Francisco Bay. Unfortunately, arguments between Elizabeth and her father led to her moving out in January 1943. At one point, Elizabeth found employment at the Base Exchange at Camp Cook, which is now known as Vandenberg Space Force Base, near Lompoc. During this time, she briefly lived with a U.S. Army Air Force sergeant, who was reported to have abused her. However, she left Lompoc in mid-1943 and moved to Santa Barbara. In Santa Barbara, her troubles continued as she was arrested on September 23, 1943, for underage drinking at a local bar. Juvenile authorities sent her back to Massachusetts, but instead of returning there, she chose to go back to Florida. During this period in Florida, she only made occasional visits to her family near Boston. While in Florida, Elizabeth crossed paths with Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., an Army Air Force officer from the 2nd Air Commando Group. He was in training for deployment to the Southeast Asian theater of World War II. Elizabeth later shared with friends that Gordon had proposed to her in a letter while he was recovering from injuries he got from a plane crash in India. She accepted his proposal, but tragically, Gordon lost his life in a second crash on August 10, 1945. In July 1946, Elizabeth Short made her way to Los Angeles to visit Army Air Force Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling, whom she had met in Florida. Fickling was stationed at the Naval Reserve Air Base in Long Beach. For the final 6 months of her life, she lived in Southern California, mainly in the Los Angeles area. In the days leading up to her murder, she had been working as a waitress and had rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. She was often described as an aspiring or would-be actress, though there is no record of her having any known acting jobs or credits. On January 9, 1947, Elizabeth returned to her Los Angeles home after a short trip to San Diego with Robert "Red" Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman she had been dating. Manley reported that he dropped Elizabeth off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where she was supposed to meet her visiting sister from Boston later that afternoon. According to some accounts, the staff at the Biltmore recalled seeing Elizabeth using the lobby telephone. Shortly after that, she was allegedly spotted by patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street, which was approximately 3/8 of a mile away from the Biltmore Hotel. On the morning of January 15, 1947, Elizabeth Short's lifeless naked body was found in an empty lot on the west side of South Norton Avenue, situated between Coliseum Street and West 39th Street, within the neighborhood of Leimert Park. At the time, Leimert Park was mainly undeveloped. The condition of Short's severely mutilated body was horrifying. It had been severed at the waist and completely drained of blood, leaving her skin a pallid white. Medical examiners determined that she took her last breath approximately 10 hours before the discovery, placing her time of death either during the evening of January 14th or the early hours of January 15th. The killer had seemingly washed the body. Elizabeth Short's face bore a ghastly, creepy smile, created by slashes from the corners of her mouth to her ears, similar to the Joker in the DC movies. There were several cuts on her thighs and breasts, with entire portions of flesh brutally sliced away. The lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper section, and her intestines had been arranged beneath her buttocks. The corpse had been purposely arranged, with her hands over her head, elbows bent at right angles, and legs spread apart. Upon the discovery, Los Angeles Herald-Express reporter Aggie Underwood was among the first on the scene and took several pictures of the corpse and the crime scene. Near the body, detectives identified a heel print on the ground amid tire tracks. A cement sack with watery blood was also found nearby. On January 16, 1947, an autopsy of Elizabeth Short's body was conducted by Frederick Newbar, the Los Angeles County coroner. According to Newbar's autopsy report, Short was 5 feet 5 inches in height, weighed 115 pounds, and had light blue eyes, brown hair, and severely decayed teeth. Ligature marks were evident on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and she had an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her right breast. Newbar also observed superficial lacerations on the right forearm, left upper arm, and the lower left side of the chest, as he documented the disturbing details. The autopsy report by Newbar also showed very little bruising along the incision line, which meant that the incision had been done after her death. Although her skull was not fractured, there was evidence of bruising on the front and right side of her scalp, along with a small amount of bleeding on the right side, consistent with blows to the head. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhaging from the facial lacerations and the shock induced by the blows to her head and face. Furthermore, Newbar's report suggested potential sexual assault. Samples were collected from her body for semen presence testing, but the results came back negative. Short's identity was established through her fingerprints, which were sent to the FBI. Her fingerprints were already on file due to her previous arrest in 1943. Once her identity was confirmed, reporters from William Randolph Hearst's Los Angeles Examiner made contact with her mother, Phoebe Short, who lived in Boston. At first, they falsely informed her that her daughter had won a beauty contest in an attempt to get as much personal information as possible from her. It was only later that they revealed the truth that her daughter had been brutally murdered. The Examiner even offered to cover Phoebe's airfare and accommodations if she traveled to Los Angeles to assist with the police investigation. However, this offer was merely a ruse, as the newspaper aimed to keep her away from other reporters and the police to protect their exclusive story. Both the Examiner and another Hearst newspaper, the Herald-Express, sensationalized the case. They described the black tailored suit that Elizabeth had last been seen wearing as a tight skirt and a sheer blouse. The media gave her the nickname Black Dahlia and portrayed her as an adventuress who supposedly prowled Hollywood Boulevard. On January 21, 1947, an individual claiming to be Elizabeth Short's killer made a phone call to the office of James Richardson, the editor of the Examiner. In the call, the person congratulated Richardson on the newspaper's coverage of the case and told him their plans of eventually surrendering to the authorities. However, they made sure that they would do so only after allowing the police to continue their pursuit. They also informed Richardson to expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. On January 24th, an envelope was discovered, and it was addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers. The envelope had single words that had been cut and pasted from newspaper clippings, and a message on the front that read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, a letter to follow." Inside the envelope, investigators found Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Much like Elizabeth's body, the packet had been carefully cleaned with gasoline, which suggested that it had been sent directly by her killer. The person apparently tried to clean the packet completely, but despite all the efforts, several partial fingerprints were lifted from the envelope. These prints were sent to the FBI for analysis, but unfortunately, they were compromised in transit and could not be properly examined. On the same day the packet was received by the examiner, a handbag and a black suede shoe were reported to have been found atop a garbage can in an alley not far from Norton Avenue, approximately 2 miles from the crime scene. Police recovered these items, but they had also been wiped clean with gasoline. They were left with no fingerprints. On March 14th, an apparent suicide note was discovered, scrawled in pencil on a small piece of paper. It was found tucked inside a shoe among a pile of men's clothing near the ocean's edge at the foot of Breeze Avenue in Venice. The note was addressed to whom it may concern and read, "I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that. Or this. Sorry, Mary." The pile of clothing and the note were spotted by a beach caretaker, who reported the discovery to lifeguard Captain John Dillon. Captain Dillon notified Captain L.E. Christensen of the West Los Angeles Police Station. Among the clothing were a coat and trousers made of blue herringbone tweed, a brown and white t-shirt, white jockey shorts, tan socks, and tan moccasin leisure shoes, approximately size 8. Unfortunately, the clothing held no immediate clues about the owner's identity. The police quickly focused their attention on Mark Hansen, who owned the address book found in the earlier packet of items. Hansen was a wealthy local nightclub and theater owner, and knew Elizabeth Short had stayed with friends. Some sources said that Hansen had confirmed the purse and shoe discovered in the alley as belonging to Elizabeth. Ann Toth, Elizabeth's friend and roommate, also told investigators that Elizabeth had recently rejected intimate approaches from Hansen, suggesting it as a potential motive for his involvement in the crime. However, Hansen was eventually cleared of suspicion in the case. Beyond Hansen, the Los Angeles Police Department interviewed over 150 men in the following weeks. Robert Manley, also known as Red, was one of the last people to see Elizabeth alive, and was also investigated, but was eventually cleared of suspicion after passing multiple polygraph examinations. The police also interviewed several people listed in Hansen's address book, including Martin Lewis, who had known Elizabeth. Lewis provided an alibi for the date of Elizabeth's murder, as he was in Portland, Oregon, visiting his terminally ill father-in-law at the time of the crime. The investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder was a massive effort involving 750 investigators from the LAPD and other law enforcement agencies. This included 400 sheriff's deputies and 250 California State Patrol officers. The search for potential evidence extended to various locations, including storm drains across Los Angeles, abandoned structures, and sites along the Los Angeles River. Unfortunately, these searches yielded no further evidence in the case. City Councilman Lloyd G. Davis offered a $10,000 reward for information that could lead to Short's killer. Following the announcement of this reward, several people came forward with confessions, but most of these confessions were dismissed by the police as false. Some of the individuals making false confessions were charged with obstruction of justice. On January 26th, another letter related to the case was received by the examiner, this time handwritten. The letter stated, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter also provided a location where the supposed killer claimed he would turn himself in. Police waited at the specified location on the morning of January 29th, but the person did not appear. Instead, at 1 p.m., the examiner's offices received another cut-and-pasted letter, which read, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." The nature of Elizabeth Short's murder, combined with the mysterious letters received by the examiner, created a media frenzy about the case. Both local and national publications covered the story, often reprinting sensational reports that falsely said Short had been tortured for hours before her death. In reality, the police allowed these false reports to circulate to move attention from Elizabeth's true cause of death. which was cerebral hemorrhage. More details about her personal life were publicized during this time. This included information about her alleged rejection of Mark Hansen's intimate attempts. A stripper who knew Elizabeth told the police that Elizabeth enjoyed men's interest but would eventually leave them unsatisfied, a saying that led some reporters and detectives to consider the possibility that she might have been a lesbian. As a result, they began questioning employees and patrons of bars in Los Angeles. However, this claim remained unconfirmed. The Herald Express magazine continued to receive letters from the so-called killer, made with cut and pasted clippings. One of these letters read, "I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." By February 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News reported that the case had hit a dead end, with no new leads whatsoever. The Examiner kept featuring stories about the murder and the ongoing investigation, keeping the case in the spotlight as front-page news for 35 days following the discovery of Elizabeth's body. During the investigation, lead investigators said to press that Elizabeth Short's murder had likely occurred in a remote building or shack on the outskirts of Los Angeles. He suggested that her body had then been transported into the city where it was left. The LAPD considered the possibility that the murderer might have had surgical or medical knowledge due to the precise cuts and dissection of her body. In mid-February 1947, the LAPD issued a warrant to the University of Southern California Medical School, which was near where the body had been discovered. The warrant asked for a complete list of the medical school's students. The university complied with the request, with the condition that the identities of the students remained confidential. Background checks were conducted on these students, but they did not yield any important results. By the spring of 1947, Elizabeth Short's murder had officially become a cold case with few new leads. In September 1949, a grand jury gathered to discuss the insufficiency of the LAPD's homicide unit, particularly their failure to solve murders, including those of women and children. Elizabeth Short's murder was among those discussed. In the aftermath of the grand jury proceedings, Short's past was investigated more. Detectives traced her movements between Massachusetts, California, and Florida, and interviewed people who had known her in Texas and New Orleans. However, these interviews did not provide any useful information regarding her murder, and the case remained unsolved. The potential link between the murder of Elizabeth Short and the Cleveland torso murders, which occurred in Cleveland, Ohio, between 1934 and 1938, has been a subject of interest for several crime authors and investigators, including police detective Peter Merylo. However, it's important to note that the original LAPD investigators who were working on the Short case in 1947 studied the torso murders but eventually cut any direct connection between the two crimes. In 1980, there was a new investigation into the possibility of a connection between Elizabeth Short's murder and the torso murders. This investigation centered on a former torso murder suspect named Jack Anderson Wilson, also known as Arnold Smith. Detective St. John claimed that he was close to arresting Wilson in connection with Short's murder, but that Wilson died in a fire on February 4, 1982. The potential link between the cases regained media attention when it was featured on the NBC series Unsolved Mysteries in 1992. Some crime authors like Steve Hodel and William Rasmussen have suggested a potential link between the murder of Elizabeth Short and the 1946 murder and dismemberment of 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan in Chicago, Illinois. Also, Captain Donahoe of the LAPD publicly said the Black Dahlia case and the lipstick murders in Chicago were likely connected. Evidence proposed to support this theory says that Short's body was found on Norton Avenue, which is 3 blocks west of Degnan Boulevard, with Degnan being the last name of the girl from Chicago. There were also similarities between the handwriting on the Degnan ransom note and that of the Black Dahlia Avenger. Both texts used a combination of capital and small letters, and both notes had a similar style letter P, along with an exact match in one word. It's worth noting that a convicted serial killer, William Hirons, served a life sentence for Suzanne Degnan's murder. Hirons, who was arrested at the age of 17 for breaking into a residence near Degnan's home, claimed he was tortured by the police, forced into confessing, and made a scapegoat for the murder. Hirons died on March 5, 2012, at the age of 83, after being taken from the medical infirmary at the Dixon Correctional Center for health problems. While the theory of a connection between the Black Dahlia case and the Degnan murder remains speculative, it has been investigated by various investigators and authors over the years. To this day, the Black Dahlia case remains a mystery with a lot of questions in mind. Could there be connections to other crimes? What do the cryptic messages sent to the press reveal? And are there hidden details yet to be uncovered? Let us know your thoughts down below. We'll see you on the next